Hi friends, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. Today I am doing my June roundup. I read a ton of books in the month of June. I read more than I was expecting to read during this month. I'm going to try and keep it as short as possible, keep my thoughts and opinions very short because I do have a huge stack of books here, plus a couple that I read online. So I guess my first protocol is to say a lot of these books I read because I took part in the Amazing Readathon during the month of June. And June was a very busy month for me as well, so managing to finish a ton of books was just a surprise. So in June I went to see Taylor Swift. We travelled a bit. My mum came to visit. We did afternoon tea. We went to a medieval jousting type of event. And I still managed to read over 16 books during the month. So I'm going to tell you all about those. I'm just going to tell you all of them and what they're about and what my thoughts were. So, to start with, I'm going to start with all of the books that I read online. So I read Wrong Place, Wrong Time. This is a thriller story that is very mind-twisting. It is about a mother who learns that her son might kill somebody, and she is slowly going back through time, and she has to try and prevent this disaster from happening. And so this was a really fun, twisty story to read. I read this while I was traveling for work and managed to finish it on my entire train journey down to London. This one kept me hooked. I was just loving every second of reading this. It was, it's very psychological. I really enjoyed the aspect of like time travel in this. The story really captivated me because time travel is something that I really enjoy. And so reading it in book form was an interesting take, and yeah, it was fun. That thriller, that was the first book that I finished for this readathon, and that got me to the next city. And then with that, I rated that book like a 4-star. I think if I read it physically, I might have enjoyed it a lot more, but obviously I listened to it on audio just. And the next ebook that I read was The House on Abigail Lane by Keelan Patrick Burke. I read 2 books by Keelan, and I read The House on Abigail Lane and The Tent. So these are really short novellas that are very creepy and disturbing. So The House on Abigail Lane is about a haunted house type of story. It's very dark and twisty, and I enjoyed reading it. It was super short, not much in it, but I do think my favourite book by Keelan Patrick Burke was The Tent. Out of the 2, The Tent was like cosmic horror, a bit of a creature feature in this, and it was so psychological. So I really enjoyed that. It was really short, so a good book to read for a readathon. So I rated both of those around a 3 and a 4. So the next set of books I read were middle grade books. So I finished the entire The House at the Edge of Magic series. This is a middle grade magical realism story that I started last year when I read The House at the Edge of Magic and absolutely fell in love. It was so atmospheric and it really pulled you into this magical world. And then I read the next 3 books in that series and finished all of them. And reading those was a good way to step out of all of the horror that I was reading. So it was a nice change of pace. And whilst it didn't get me bonus points for reading my team's genre, it was refreshing to just take the step back and read something fun and lighthearted. And then the next one that I read was a really short audiobook that Stephen King had written called Riding the Bullet. And this is a story that I didn't know even existed. It was super short. I read it in like 2 hours. So it was very fun to read. It's kind of like a hitchhiker's story that kind of proves why you shouldn't hitchhike. And so obviously as a master of horror, he wrote this in such a way and really captivated you into the story. So I really enjoyed reading Riding the Bullet, and that sent me on a Stephen King kind of spiral. I wanted to read a lot more by him, and catch up on this Stephen King goal that I have. I've read 38 out of like 83 or something like that of his works, so I'm not even halfway yet, but hopefully by the end of the year I will be. So yeah, I started on my Stephen King kick again following this audiobook. So I give this audiobook a 4 actually, because it was just so captivating and the narration as well really kept you into the story. I move on to the books that I physically read. I'm going to start with the one that I finished most recently and work my way back to the very start of the month. The last book that I physically finished was The Silent Patient. This one was so intense. I enjoyed every second of reading this book, and I don't know why it took me so long to actually read this one. So this is a story set in a mental hospital, a psychiatric ward, and we start this story off with a murder. So this starts off with Alicia, who shoots her husband, and then we follow her, and she then kind of doesn't speak when she's in this psychiatric ward. She is convicted with killing her husband, but she doesn't speak, and she is just sent to this ward, and we have a psycho therapist. So the psychotherapist kind of gets involved. He intertwines himself into the story. So he's obsessed with this woman and is trying his best to kind of get her to talk. And so he goes around to her family, learning about the backstory and everything, and tries his best to make the silent patient just a patient and figure out why she did what she did. So I really love the psychology of this book. It really pulls you into it, and you're really rooting for this doctor to figure out why exactly she did what she did. So it's so intense, and I really enjoyed this one. So the twist I didn't really see coming, but I think if I was to reread this story, I probably could pick out the telltale signs. But nevertheless, I didn't want to go into this picking at the plot. It was a fun story, and I kind of just went with the flow, and I enjoyed this one. And then, of course, I had to act on this Stephen King craving. So when I went to the library, I found Revival by Stephen King. This is a story that I've been wanting to read for such a long time now. I really loved the cover, and everybody really enjoys this one, so I knew that this would be something that I would love. This is a story that is told across 5 decades, and when I first heard that, I didn't think it was possible to make a story so unison across multiple years. So the way that he wrote this story was incredible. I loved every second of it, the character development in this story. And I used to complain about Stephen King overwriting and describing and making his characters talk too much. But I think everything that went into this book was necessary. And the way he writes friendships and relationships and how they develop and change over the years in this story was just amazing. So I thoroughly loved this story. And of course, it does center around a mad scientist who uses lightning. And it's like the whole like miracle type in a tent sort of story. So yeah, I highly suggest picking Revival up if you haven't read it yet, because it is probably one of his better books in the modern time. So yeah, really loved this and is actually a 5-star read for me. And then I finally read In the Miso Soup. This one has been on my June TBR. It was on my radar for over a year and just sat on the shelf. So I thought it would be the perfect time to pick it up. And when it fit a prompt for the Amazing Readathon, was kind of like a sign to just read it and get it out of the way. For me, this one had so much potential. This stood out because it is set in Japan and it follows the night scene in Japan, and I kind of thought it was something I would absolutely love. So it is centered around this American tourist who wants to explore the nightlife and the sex scene in Japan. And his tour guide over time notices that he is not quite right and there's something off about this American tourist. So we kind of follow that story and him trying to figure out what exactly Frank, who is the American tourist, is up to. And it gets very dark and twisty. And yeah, it's atmospheric, don't get me wrong. I couldn't connect with these two characters. I felt there was a bit of a disconnect in the writing in terms of how they're supposed to interact with each other and their developments throughout the story. So I did only rate this one a 3 because I did enjoy the overall disgustingness and also how he describes finding out about Frank and what he does. So, but it is only a 3 because I just really couldn't connect fully into the story. And then we have a book that was a complete surprise for me. I will link my video where I read this book, talking about me probably not going to enjoy it. So that is The Housemaid. This is a domestic thriller, and I wasn't sure that it was going to be for me, but I was pleasantly surprised by this story. So I'm not going to say too much about this one. I will let you check out the actual vlog where I read this book, because it was a complete surprise, but I did really love this story and I do highly recommend checking it out if you can. I said I wasn't going to continue this series if I didn't enjoy it, but it does look like I will continue this series because I thoroughly enjoyed reading this. And then we have another book I read in that vlog, which was The Pale House Devil. I adored this story. This is a cosmic creature feature story. It is super short, so I read this in like an hour and a half. Absolutely loved every second of reading it. It was so good. Again, I will let you watch that vlog to really get into the details of me and my thoughts on this story. But essentially we're following two PIs who one is undead and the other is a human, and they go around and try to solve mysteries. Yeah, I really love the banter between our two main characters. It is such a fun story to read, and I do really want Richard Cadre to write more in this world because I feel like this would make such a good series. And I can't just leave it at like a mini novella. I need more of this story. Really love this cosmic creature feature horror book. And I think if you really like banter-based horror and also grotesque nature, this one is definitely something that you should pick up. The next book is a reread, and that was This Is Where We Talk Things Out. I read it again for that vlog that I talked about. And this is a winter-based story that centers around family dynamics and estranged relationship between a mother and daughter. They try to rekindle their relationship at a cabin in the woods, and shit hits the fan. So I'm not going to say too much more about that because this is a story you do need to read yourself. I loved reading this the first time, enjoyed it the second time, so I do always recommend picking this short novella up because it is such a creepy family-based drama, and it is definitely worth the time that you take to read this story. Really loved it. Again, another 5-star book for me. Then we have The Summer I Died. This is a extreme horror book that is very intense. Again, I read that for my other vlog, so all of the descriptions and initial thoughts and final opinions on this book are in there. But essentially, this gripped me so much. I didn't think I would finish it in the vlog, but I ended up reading this and not stopping. I had to finish it. It was so gripping, yet disgusting. So this is about a guy who returns home from college, meets up with his best friend, his childhood friend, and they try to re-establish their friendship over the summer. They hear a woman scream, so they try to be heroes and try and save her, but end up in a very bad situation themselves where they are fighting for their lives against this psychotic killer. It is so gross in the best way possible. The descriptions of the death and mutilations, it is not for the faint of heart. I will tell you that. My stomach was queasing while reading this book, but it was so intense and such a fun ride that I think if you're into horror books, I mean, if you're watching this, you probably are into horror books. This is definitely one to not sleep on. This one will definitely change your mindset on horror and extreme horrors. It's definitely a great book to read, and I loved reading this one. So check this out if you haven't yet. The next Stephen King book that I finished this month was Bag of Bones. So this is chunky. I did not read all of this in June. I read about 60% of this in June. I started this one last year and kind of got a bit bored because I was just reading Stephen King all the time. So I had to put this down for a bit, picked it back up, and just engulfed myself into this world. I loved all of this. This is probably up there with being one of my favorite Stephen King books. This one is like a ghost story, but it's not your typical ghost story. It follows a writer who returns to a village after his wife dies and gets stumbled into this craziness, trying to confront the past, but he might drown in it. So yeah, I'm not going to say too much about it because it is such a fun story to go in blind and learn everything yourself, because that's what I did, and I absolutely loved every second of reading this book. It is quite long. It is wordy. It's Stephen King, of course it's going to be wordy, but the way it's written is just so good, and the whole ghostly aspect of this, whilst the horrors are so subtle, they are definitely there. And so yeah, that just makes it an incredible book to read. So yeah, I would say check this one out if you're not too mad about longer books. And finally, the last book that I'm going to tell you about is The Girl Before. And this is quite a disappointment to end on because this was like the second book that I read in the month and I did not enjoy this one bit. This is following multiple perspectives. The man had a wife beforehand, he remarries, and the new wife is learning about the girl before her, and what exactly happened and why she actually died herself. So it is twisty, but I didn't enjoy this one at all. The writing just wasn't it for me. But I did finish it because I was interested to find out what exactly happened. And I feel like the twist and like the ending was just flat. So unfortunately, I can only give this like a 2-star because I just did not connect with the writing style. or the overall plot. There's a lot of like trigger warnings in this story as well. For a domestic thriller, you kind of do expect that, but I wasn't a fan of it, so not one that I would recommend. These are all the books that I read in the month of June for the Amazing Readathon. So I hope you have enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments if you read any of these yourself and what you thought. And thank you so much for watching. But until next time, keep your pages turning and embrace the darkness. Bye.